What's up, everybody? Welcome to What's Up, the show where we talk all things energy. We'll share some stories, maybe share some laughs, and give you the information you need to make informed energy choices. My name is Danielle Salisbury. I'm joined by my fellow community energy advisors and Cornell Cooperative Extension educators working on NYSERDA's Community Energy Engagement Program, Sean Welsh and Colin Adkins. Through this program, local community energy advisors in 10 regions across the state help residents and businesses reduce their energy consumption and energy costs and make informed energy decisions. We will be posting our contact information in the comment section of the Facebook post, along with other helpful resources that we mentioned today. If you'd like to ask us a question, please do so through the comment section of this video. Today's episode is the second in our series on building materials. Hopefully you tuned into the last week to catch part 1, What's in Your Walls? But if you didn't, you can still catch that episode as well as all of our previous episodes right here on our Facebook page. I highly recommend going back and watching part 1, although it isn't required for understanding and enjoying today's episode. Today, we continue our talk with Stephen Stuart, the former sustainability analyst for Sullivan County Office of Sustainability and former executive director of Sullivan Alliance for Sustainable Development and lifetime practitioner of energy and sustainability through his work and personal life. Now I'm going to turn it over to Sean and Stephen to continue the deep dive into the materials that make up our home.
I wanted to share my screen. This is an extension, one of our extension spreadsheets that goes over materials here. And I shared with this with you earlier, and I think it's good because one of the things that when we talk about the programs that we work with here, the residential energy audit program, the assisted home performance with Energy Star program at Power New York. A lot of times folks get involved with these programs, and then they have the conversation about how can we insulate these things? And it comes in, we could do we could do a loose blow in, we could blow it in, we can apply a rigid foam. They talk about the type, not necessarily what the material is. So I wanted just to talk about from the perspective of like the jobs and getting work done and out in the community when it comes to energy efficiency work. We'll look at the type and then kind of talk about what kind of materials are associated with these types. And so there'll be multiple types of materials associated with each one of these. So why don't we could look at the first one on here is a blanket or a bat or a roll. And I always associated that with just fiberglass. And I was surprised to see a couple others on here.
Yes, mineral wool is available in a bat. Plastic fibers, I'm not too familiar with plastic fibers in a bat or a roll. But the natural fibers too. I mean, you can find a natural fiber bat or roll made of hemp, made of wool, made of Levi jeans, the shreds of jeans, and they all have different advantages and disadvantages.
So we're looking at the advantages here on the chart. It's good for a DIY situation because they are pretty. If you've got standard walls, a bat works well, right? So
yes,
you just roll it out and put it in there. Follow the directions always of which is the face side as opposed to the the other side, the stud side. And it's relatively inexpensive for most bats.
Correct. It is relatively inexpensive for most bats. And what you're pointing out in terms of paying attention to how you put it in, most of the bats or rolls will have a paper or foil covering on them. And that's designed to be a vapor barrier. And that always goes toward the warm in winter side of the house.
So the interior of
right, to the interior, and it is relatively expensive, and you absolutely can do it yourself depending on what material you're using. You do want to have, we've talked a lot in these last 4 or 5 months about personal protective equipment, respirators, face masks. You
Yeah.
want to have those on when you're doing fiberglass, mineral wool, plastic, or natural fiber insulation, because they all will let off some dust and some fibers, some worse than others. So just got to protect yourself.
Yeah. And so looking at this chart here with the disadvantages for your bats and rolls are prone to some air gaps around those edges. So that just speaks to, if these are used, air sealing is another really important point to just be considerate of. And of course, compressing will reduce the R value. The next type that I wanted to talk about is one that gets brought up a lot when we're talking about upgrades, as far as, when you get the results of an audit back. It's a lot of times we'll have a loose fill or a blown in insulation recommendation on an audit. So what those types of materials that we find with those insulation products are a couple here. Stephen, you want to just touch on those?
Yes. So the 3 most typical are cellulose, which is recycled newsprint or cardboard that has been treated with a borate so that it is rodent proof, insect resistant, and flame and fire resistant. Then you have fiberglass, which is, instead of that fiberglass being in the bat, it's chopped. So it's a loose, it comes in a bag and you pour it out into your machine. And mineral wool is the same thing. It is, instead of the bat, it's a chopped fibrous product.
Yeah, just real quick on mineral wool. That's a spun rock fiber, if I recall correctly, right?
Yes. Yes,
All right.
it's created from the waste of the slag from smelting furnaces, and it is probably the most fire resistant insulation that we have on the market. It's actually used, if you look at a lot of the UL Underwriter Laboratories ways to lessen the distance of a combustion appliance to wood framing, mineral wool is a key element in filling in that gap, because it is so good at resisting heat flow.
So it's a nice product, but as far as loose fill and blown in goes, these cellulose, fiberglass, and mineral wool would all be used in those settings. As far as walls go, unfinished attics, and hard to reach areas. So a lot of times, if you've got a house already built, these might be those recommendations.
Yes.
Get back on an audit or something.
Yes, and the blown in can be installed both from the exterior or the interior, depending on is the house occupied or not. I have a 1890, 1940 building, and when my wife and I bought it, there was no insulation in the walls, and so we had cellulose dense packed in, and I didn't want people hanging out on ladders on the second floor, and the second floor was not occupied, so we just put it in from the inside, did our holes on the inside sheetrock wall, and blew that cellulose in, and it was a quick job of patching and closing them up.
So you did it from the inside, but you could also, it can be recommended to go through like underneath the siding from the outside too, the way I understand it, right?
Yes, exactly. Typically what happens there is that the bottom layer of siding will be carefully removed if it's a single-story home, or if it's a two-story home, wherever your access is to that wall cavity, and a small hole is made, the tube, the fill tube is placed into the wall, and you start to dense pack that cellulose or fiberglass or mineral wool into that wall. And it does get around all of your pipes and your electrical runs, and it actually then plugs up those holes in your studs where the wire is going from one stud bay to the next. So it helps a great deal that way.
So the blown-in option has some clear advantages for a house that's already built, and you don't want to get that invasive as far as, you know, pulling anything down off the wall or anything like that.
Right, exactly.
But as far as disadvantages go, it can settle over time, the way I understand things too, and which would reduce its R value if that compression kind of discussion that we just had holds true. Would that be correct?
Correct, and it would settle over time. And that would then leave you those gaps the same way you would have the gap if you didn't fill your bat insulation to the very top or the very bottom of your wall cavity.
Right. Okay, so moving on. So the next one here we've got is spray foam and foamed in place. So there's a couple different types here. You want to just comment on this?
Yeah, the most common are the polyurethanes and the polyisocyanurates. They are used in walls, unfinished attics, floors. There are sometimes, you know, even though I don't like them, there are some areas where I see where they might be good to use and have used them. Full disclosure. And I wouldn't say that they're good for adding insulation to existing finished areas.
Yeah.
Because you're poking holes in walls, and you don't get to see whether or not the mix was properly done, and to see whether or not that foam actually has filled in all those gaps and crevices.
So you do need a visual, from what I understand, that with this to apply it correctly.
Absolutely.
So two of the terms that I hear with foam a lot is hard sell, or closed and open.
Right.
So those are, from what I understand, the open cell is a softer one. It's actually, you could press it a little, and that,
yes, that's correct.
It lets some moisture through in some cases. Am I on target there?
You're on target there, and in some cases it can really hold a lot of moisture.
Right, and so if you do have like a leak in something, you wouldn't know for a while.
Correct.
If it gets caught up in a foam, kind of, you know, in the wall.
Right, because that foam would be kind of like a sponge and hold that moisture.
Right.
And since it does act somewhat as a vapor barrier, an air barrier, it won't allow a natural movement of air through the wall to carry that moisture out.
Right. Right.
That wall.
And so in the hard sell it gives a better R value than the open, or so the closed cell, I guess is the name for it, that most often.
Right. Right.
And that it's harder. So if you pressed on it, it would be like a lot denser than the open cell.
Yeah. And it is a high cost also. So one of the things that you have to keep in mind is what is your cost per R value? And spray foams have the highest cost per R value of any insulation.
It's a good point. It's gonna up the price point of a project for sure. But and another one of the disadvantages with the polyurethane foam is that it off gases a greenhouse gas. So we do want to disclose that.
Yes. And the other thing to keep in mind with the foams, because we're going to go into the rigid foam board and the structural insulated panels, so that blowing agent off gases, and so over time it's leaving the foam and it's actually degrading the R value of the foam. So you start out with paying the highest cost per R with that insulation, but over time it can lose up to 10-15% of its insulation
Wow.
value because of the off-gassing of the blowing agent.
The material and the blowing. Wow.
And then it's also really tricky to install. You have the installers have to absolutely know what they're doing. They have to keep those barrels. They have a barrel and a B barrel. One is the foam and one is the blowing agent. They have to have those at a constant temperature so that they can mix properly. If they're doing it on a cold, windy day, they're going to lose some of that heat that is needed. And if you take a look at someone spraying foam and someone putting in cellulose or fiberglass and look at their personal protective equipment, that can tell you something about the materials.
No, it's very common to see him in a full hazmat suit.
Wow, really interesting discussion. Thanks, Stephen. Thanks, Sean. Thanks, Danielle. I'm going to go do some investigating of my own right now, see what's in my walls. Unfortunately, that's all the time we've got this week. Thanks again to our guest, Stephen Stuart, for joining us to talk about insulation. Stephen's going to be back for our third and final installment of our discussion about what's in our walls. So come on back for that episode or check out our past episodes at CCE Dutchess on Facebook. If you have any questions about today's episode or would like to reach out to your local community energy advisor, find out about cost-saving programs you might be eligible for, visit midhudsonenergychoices.org or contact your local Cornell Cooperative Extension office. Thanks and see you soon.